Back in 2013, when I was 17, my family went to look at a house that was up for sale. It seemed like a normal Sunday afternoon. Gray skies, a light breeze. My parents full of excitement about the idea of moving. When we got there, the owner himself was waiting for us outside. He was an older man, polite, friendly, the kind of person you wouldn't think twice about trusting. He shook hands with my dad, laughed with my mom, and proudly told them he had built the house with his own 2 hands. While they chatted, I stayed a few steps back, half pretending to scroll on my phone, half watching the man's body language. At first he seemed completely harmless, his smile wide and his tone warm. But then something happened that still makes my stomach twist. In the middle of their conversation, there was this brief pause. No one said anything for a couple of seconds, and in that silence, the man turned his head slightly away from my parents, just enough that he thought no one was paying attention. His face transformed. The cheerful grandfatherly smile drained away and was replaced with a look so cold and hateful it didn't even seem human. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed with pure malice, like he was staring at someone he despised. I froze. I don't think he realized I was watching him. From where I stood, with my head tilted down, it must have looked like I was just buried in my phone. But I was staring straight at him, and I'll never forget that look. 10 seconds later, he turned back toward my parents, and instantly the smile returned. It was like flipping a mask on and off. The moment left me rattled, but I didn't want to overreact. Later that night, I told my mom what I'd seen. She frowned, admitted it was strange, but brushed it off as maybe the guy being awkward, or having a bad thought slip through his face. She didn't think it was serious. We bought the house anyway. It was a good deal, big enough for our family, and on the surface nothing seemed wrong. For the first week after we moved in, everything felt normal. I unpacked, got used to the creaks of the floorboards, the sound of wind rattling the old windows. I told myself the man's strange expression had been in my imagination, but the following weekend proved me wrong. It was a Sunday morning. My parents and younger siblings decided to go to church. I wasn't in the mood and asked if I could stay home. They didn't mind, so they left around 10:30, leaving me completely alone in the house for the first time. At first it was quiet. I went upstairs, settled into my room, and put on some music while I scrolled through my phone. About half an hour later, a loud banging sound echoed from outside. Not random creaks, but steady, rhythmic pounding against the side of the house. The wind was picking up, rain starting to fall, so I convinced myself it must just be the storm. I ignored it, trying to focus on my screen. But then, after 5 minutes, the banging stopped, and a new sound began. Footsteps, from downstairs. It wasn't subtle either. Whoever it was, they walked with weight. I heard the creak of floorboards, the scrape of a chair being moved, the click of kitchen cabinets opening and closing. Even the refrigerator door opened with that familiar suction sound. My blood ran cold. I jumped up, locked my bedroom door as quietly as I could, and grabbed the old baseball bat I kept in the corner. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped my phone as I dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher, giving them my address, explaining that someone had broken in and was walking around downstairs. At the same time, I texted my mom, telling her to come home immediately. The dispatcher kept me calm, or at least tried to. But then the footsteps grew louder. They moved from the kitchen, through the living room, and began climbing the staircase. I could hear each step groaning under the weight of whoever was coming up. The walls in that house were thin, and I knew exactly how close he was getting. By the time the footsteps reached the hallway, my entire body was frozen. I raised the bat, staring at my bedroom door. Then the handle turned. It rattled once, then held still. Whoever was on the other side didn't knock, didn't say a word. He just stood there, and I swear, through that thin wood I could hear slow, heavy breathing. 10 seconds stretched into an eternity. My heart was beating so hard it drowned out everything else. Finally, the sound of footsteps started again, this time moving away. Down the hall, back down the stairs. A door opened somewhere below, then slammed shut. Silence. 3 minutes later, the police arrived. The dispatcher asked if I could unlock the front door, or if they should force their way in. My whole body trembled as I crept down the staircase. I checked every corner, terrified he was still there, but the house seemed empty. I let the officers in. They searched every room, every closet, nothing. No sign of forced entry. No open windows, no broken locks. It was like whoever had been there had vanished into thin air. When my mom came home, pale and panicked, she immediately asked my stepdad if he had changed the locks yet. He said no. He hadn't touched them. That's when we noticed something that made my skin crawl worse than anything else, the hallway carpet. My mom had vacuumed it that very morning. It was perfectly clean when they left, but now imprinted deep into the fibers were footprints. Large, heavy shoe prints, far bigger than anyone in my family could make. They trailed down the hallway, ending directly outside my bedroom door. The police hadn't gone upstairs yet, so the prints couldn't have been theirs. They were proof that someone, or something, had been standing right outside while I hid, listening to my every breath. We replaced the locks the very next day. My parents added extra deadbolts, even a security bar for the back door. But no matter how many precautions we took, I never felt safe in that house again. Even now, years later, the memory of that hateful face and those footprints outside my door still sends shivers down my spine. We bought the place in rural Missouri, a 2-story house that used to be part of a working horse ranch. It was dated 1997 architecture. Lots of wood, wide porches, and the kind of quiet that feels heavy at night. My wife and I were exhausted the day we moved in. We couldn't stay yet, so we booked a hotel about 20 miles away, and spent the first few nights commuting back and forth, hauling boxes between the truck and rooms and doing the make-it-livable work in bursts. The house had belonged to an older couple for decades. The first owner passed away recently after a long illness, and his wife, unable to maintain the place alone, finally agreed to sell. She seemed relieved to have it gone, and she admitted she'd never intended to leave, but had no choice. We were glad for the deal, not thinking about any of that old history. On paper, it was a solid buy. In person, you could feel the age of the place everywhere. The creak of the staircase, the old hinges, the long shadowed hallway that ran between the bedrooms. On our second full day working there, I did something small that would stay with me. I turned on the long hallway light and left it on. It was a wide corridor, the kind that runs like a spine through the center of an old house. And at night, it was almost impossibly dim without that single bulb. I left it lit when we took the dogs out to the barn, left it lit when we fetched dinner from the hotel, even left it lit while we ran errands to Walmart and back. When I returned that evening exhausted, the light was off. I assumed my wife had turned it off. I asked her casually, "You switched the hallway light?" She looked at me blankly. She'd been out at the barn working with the animals, maybe 200 feet from the house, and she swore she hadn't touched it. We laughed it off at first. Old houses do weird things, we told each other. Wiring is temperamental. But that night when I went to bed, I made a mental note, leave it on again. By midday the next day, I noticed the light had been switched off. Again. We were running between house chores and the hotel like sleep-deprived zombies. Neither of us wanted to think about mysteries. After a full day of moving and carrying, the light was back on. That evening, when we came back from dinner, the hallway light was still on. I made my wife lock the pugs in the laundry room for the night. Smaller dogs, stubborn little things, but usually faithful at keeping doors shut when we closed them. When we returned the following morning, the laundry room door was closed, and a mess of small destruction greeted us. The pugs had chewed a few things, and they were loose in the house. That in itself wasn't the strangest part. The laundry room has a simple pull-down handle, not a knob, set at a height the dogs cannot reach on their hind legs. For the door to open, someone or something would need to pull the handle down and then pull the door inward. Physically, it just wasn't feasible for a pair of tiny pugs. Yet they had gotten out. Twice. 3 times. We installed an AT alarm system with motion detectors inside the house. The kind of modern security that makes you feel like you finally closed the loop on safety. The system didn't help us understand what had happened to the dogs. Motion sensors didn't trigger during the nights they escaped. On tape, there was no sign of forced entry. No cameras catching a person passing by. The footage simply showed closed doors and sleeping animals. Then a few hours later, the dogs running free like they had always been in the house. A week into living between hotel and house, I had an odd, unnerving encounter at the bedroom door where the old man had spent his final days. I went to open it, and the handle didn't move. At first, I thought it was stuck from humidity or some misalignment. The handle was the kind you pull down to unlatch. Normally, there's a little give. You tug, the latch slips, the door opens. This time, the handle had no give at all. It felt as if something on the other side was putting all its weight against the door. A steady pressure pushing outward. I pushed, the door didn't budge. For a moment I thought of the dogs, of some furniture wedged against it, but the hall was empty. I felt the hair rise on my arms. Then, without warning, the handle moved. Not with the slow friction of a jam letting go, but with a sudden clean release like someone had latched off in an instant. There was no creak, no scraping, no sound at all. The simple silence of it was what terrified me most. I bolted outside and nearly fell getting into the pickup where my wife sat, my heart still racing, trying to speak words that felt ridiculous. The door. It was like someone was pressing. She thought I was spooked from too much moving. She did not experience anything, at least not then. We tried rational explanations over and over. The house settled. The wood swelled from moisture. The dogs must have learned some trick. Maybe an old mechanical glitch on the handle made it act strange. We told ourselves those things because the alternatives were worse. To consider the possibility that something else was happening here felt like opening a wound we didn't want to touch. But then alarms began to go off in ways that made no sense. While we were back in California waiting for repair estimates after a flood damaged the house, AT called one morning to report that the front door sensor had been triggered, and there was motion detected in the front room. The system sent an officer who checked and reported the house secure. No forced entry, no signs of a break-in. This happened more than once. Callbacks from the alarm company, reports of triggered sensors, officers coming by to find everything buttoned up like it always had been. The log showed doors opening and closing, motion in rooms where no human had walked. Each time, the first instinct of law enforcement was simple. Burglars, a fault in the system, a false alarm. But the pattern kept repeating, and every time the dogs had been left inside, or the house left empty, or the door supposedly locked, there were anomalies. We tried blessings and prayers. As people who believed, we held quiet services in the living room, crossed the thresholds with psalms and incense, asked for peace. For a while something felt lighter, but then other things started to surface. A personal item left by the previous owners. An ornate, delicate object that looked like it belonged to a memory box went missing after we first moved in. In a moment of anger, convinced it carried an unfair story, I smashed a piece, trying to free myself from the weight of the house's past. Later, I tried to put it back together, to make things right, but pieces were gone. I couldn't find them. I told myself I'd misplaced them in the chaos. Then I remembered the nights when the hallway light clicked off by itself. My wife, to her credit, was mostly unbothered. She took the practical approach. Fix the handle, replace the alarm, throw out the trash the previous owners left behind, and scrub the house clean. But some nights, when she worked late in the barn, or slept heavy after a long day on the road, she'd wake with a start and say, "Did you hear that?" Or, "I thought I saw someone on the porch." When I pressed for details, it would be small things. An impression of movement, a shadow that didn't line up with anyone we knew. She would shrug and try to laugh off the unease. The house had a way of keeping its distance. We vacillated between staying and leaving. The flood forced our hand for a while. Repairs, insurance forms, estimates. But even once the house was habitable again, the question remained. Could we bring ourselves to move back in? We fought about it. Fear is a corrosive thing. It eats at your patience, at your courage. On good days, I convinced myself we were being superstitious, that common sense would prevail. On other days, I pictured footsteps outside the bedroom where the old owner slept, the handle being held by an invisible force, the pugs free but nowhere to be found. There were also interpersonal things that added a bitter flavor to the story. The seller had been less than honest about the condition of the property, and when we called them on it, their explanations were thin and defensive. A final straw was finding items left by relatives tucked away, with notes addressed to a memory we didn't share. Gestures of grief we hadn't been given the chance to respect. I reacted badly one night. I destroyed something on the porch that had felt like a mockery of the grief we were supposed to be honoring. Later, I regretted it. I tried to repair what I'd broken and could not find all the pieces. It felt like a small humiliation, but in the weird logic of that house, it took on the weight of something much larger. We talked about moving crosses into the rooms, about surrounding the house with talismans or symbols that would, in theory, keep whatever it was away. I joked about it once, and then realized I wasn't joking at all. The idea of returning to sleep in that big, dark hallway, with the light that sometimes turned itself off, felt impossible. Not because of drafty windows or miswired lights, but because of an awareness we couldn't name. That the house had seen things we could not understand, and it guarded those things with a stubborn silence. Eventually, we reached a decision many couples dread. Either double down and live through it, or walk away and let the house keep its secrets. We weren't ready to call it. Some nights the house was simply a house. The sunlight warmed the floors and the dogs lounged in sunbeams. Other nights, when the hallway light would blink out and the laundry room door would stand closed against empty air, the old owner's presence felt like the last puff of a shadow refusing to leave. I still think about that hallway when I'm awake too late, when the road is quiet and the trucks are gone. The light that flicked off and on, the handle that held like someone pressing from the other side, the alarm logs that recorded motion when no motion should exist. Those are not things easily explained away. We learned that sometimes the peace you want most is the peace you have to fight for, and sometimes the thing you are fighting is not of this world. For now, the house sits patched and quiet, waiting to tell the next owners a few more of its secrets. When I was 12, we lived in Kansas, a quiet neighborhood that mostly felt safe until it didn't. That winter afternoon, I remember the light in my room being low, the glow from the old TV painting my ceiling blue. I was sitting on the floor, elbows on my knees, fully zoned into Halo. Controller in one hand, a bag of Doritos in the other. The world felt small and contained. My little corner of the house, the two dogs curled at my feet, the quiet hum of suburban life beyond the windows. My parents had left to run errands and my older sister was at work. I was home alone, but not really alone. The dogs were good company. One was a scrappy terrier, always alert. The other a fluffy Bichon, more of a couch potato. They weren't the kind to stop intruders, only the kind to bark when something felt off. Despite that, this neighborhood had its odd patches. Someone had spray-painted racist graffiti on nearby playground equipment a few months earlier, so there was a low-level unease in the back of our heads, even if nothing directly threatened us. Then I heard the front door open. It wasn't the slow creak of a poorly hung hinge. It was the clear, unmistakable sound of the latch turning and the door closing behind somebody. My music was low, and the TV wasn't blaring, so the noise cut through the room. The dogs instantly stiffened and bolted to the living room, not barking but moving fast, their noses up, ears perked. For a moment I thought, "Oh, they must be home early," I called out. "Mom, Dad." My voice felt small in the empty house. No answer. My palms went cold. It was a stupid, childlike reaction. I grabbed the baseball bat from the closet, the kind of reflex that lives in every Midwestern kid. If something's wrong, you arm yourself. I crept toward the living room. Every step measured, the wood floor under my feet louder than it should have been. The hallway that led to the front door always looked longer at moments like this. Shadows pooled where sunlight usually lay. The dogs sat at the edge of the hallway, eyes fixed on the foyer. Their behavior said something my irrational brain didn't want to admit. There had been someone in the house. I called out again, louder. Nothing. I tried calling my dad. No answer. My mom didn't pick up either. I rang 2 friends, nothing. The house felt suddenly enormous, every door and closet a possible hiding place. My imagination, at 12, skittered to the worst-case scenarios. What if they were hurt? What if someone bad had come in while we were gone? I dialed 911 with shaking hands. The operator's voice over the line, calm, practiced, told me to stay put, to lock doors, to wait for help. They asked questions I didn't know how to answer. Had I seen anyone? Was anything missing? I could only say I had heard the door and that the dogs had reacted. The dispatcher said officers were on the way. While I waited, time stretched and misbehaved. 10 seconds felt like a year. The hallway stared back at me, a tunnel of potential threats. The dogs refused to move from the threshold. My chest tightened with the kind of fear you only feel when you realize you are truly alone and not in control. I pictured shadows moving in closets, imagined footsteps behind doors. Then, just as the anxiety threatened to swallow me, the front door swung open. My parents stood there, faces strained, keys in hand. Relief crashed through me so hard I felt dizzy. My dad looked at me like I'd done something dangerous and muttered, "What the heck are you doing?" I choked out a quick explanation. I'd heard the door. The dogs had gone nuts. I called the police. He didn't waste a second. He grabbed his pistol from the front room, ushered us into a quick, practical plan, and we started checking rooms the way you see on TV, door by door, flashlight beams slicing the darkness. We found nothing. Nothing at all. No person hiding in the closets. No sign of an intruder. The police arrived soon after, sirens distant and then close, and explained that this wasn't uncommon. Reported break-ins in our area had risen recently, they said. People were testing houses, waiting until homeowners left, seeing if a door was unlocked, and if it was, they'd slip in and take small things. Most times they left when a house seemed occupied. The officers told us what they told everyone. Lock your doors, keep valuables out of sight, and be cautious. Their faces were professional, concerned but practiced. It made me feel better, and not at all better at the same time. That one afternoon didn't stop the strange pattern of things that kept happening around me. Tiny, eerie moments that piled up until they felt like a heavier truth. A few weeks after the front door incident, I was loading dishes into the back of the car for Thanksgiving. It was cold. Breath hung in front of me like a small cloud. I placed the last pie into the trunk and heard an older woman's voice behind me. "You'd better be careful with that," she said, teasing like a neighbor. I turned with a polite smile, ready to pretend we'd been chatting, only to find nobody on the driveway. No explanation, no figure moving away. The street was empty, the neighborhood quiet. For a second I thought maybe my brother was playing a prank, but he wasn't there either. My mom came out, and I asked if she had called out to me. She looked puzzled and said no. It was a small, chilling moment. It lodged in my chest more firmly than any one scare should. Then, on another night, I was in bed when I heard a muffled sob somewhere close by. It was soft and human and unbearably sad. I texted my mom just to be sure, and she replied, "I heard crying too. Are you okay?" We both checked our rooms. The dog was sleeping at the foot of her bed. There was no source for the sobbing except the thin walls of an old house, and the night that seemed to make every little sound feel like meaning. My mom tried to rationalize. She said maybe it was Grandma. My grandmother had died about 6 months after we moved in, and my mom sometimes told herself she heard her. But the voice I heard on Thanksgiving wasn't my grandmother's warm, calm tone. It was sharper, edged in something else. My mom admitted that sometimes she'd hear knocks and assume it was one of her kids, only to remember we were all at school. She tried to hold on to comforting explanations, but I kept thinking, what if the place kept pieces of itself, echoes of people who had lived and left, and not quite moved on? The house was ordinary in most ways. It had an upright piano in the living room with slightly out-of-tune keys, family photos in frames on the hallway table, a floral wallpaper that's been popular for decades. Those things make it easy to hold on to the idea that ordinary things happen for ordinary reasons. But once you notice one or two odd things, the rest fall into a pattern that becomes harder to dismiss. The fear I felt as a kid wasn't dramatic. It wasn't midnight shadows or floating apparitions. It was the accumulation of small betrayals, a voice that shouldn't be there, a sob that didn't come from a human in the house, the sound of a door closing when no one had entered. All of it taught me something about the way houses remember. A house is the sum of the people who've lived there, their losses, their laughter, their fights, and sometimes their unresolved ending. Maybe that's what I was sensing. Not a monster in a traditional sense, but a residue of living that refused to settle. Years later, when I tell the story, people ask why I grabbed a bat instead of running next door, or why I called the police instead of confronting the noise. Maybe a younger me thought bravery meant being ready for the worst. Maybe it was the way we were raised. Practicality first, panic later. Or maybe the small defenses we adopt as kids are the only things that make sense when your brain is too small to fully understand the dangers you imagine. The officers did their checks, left pamphlets about neighborhood watch programs, and recommended extra locks. My parents moved more cautiously after that. We kept our doors locked even in the daytime. We learned to trust and to distrust in measured ways. The incident didn't lead to a dramatic reveal or a final explanation. There was no grand closure, but it did change me. I grew up with a sense that ordinary places can hold oddness beneath the surface, quiet, patient things that make themselves known in the smallest, most unsettling ways. When I look back, the scariest part wasn't that something overtly violent had happened. It was the way my mind filled blanks with worry, the way silence could be read as threat, how a small voice could be louder than thunder. That winter in Kansas left me with a simple rule. When things don't feel right in a place, listen to the feeling. Sometimes it's only your instincts warning you, and sometimes, well, the house remembers more than you do.